November 15th, 1315. The Alps, snow-covered and silent, yet poised to become the stage for one of the most brutal and decisive battles of the Middle Ages. On the shores of icy Lake Egeri, in a narrow, suffocating mountain pass, two forces clash. On one side, the powerful, immensely overconfident Habsburg army, thousands of steel-clad knights whose coats of arms gleam in the cold sun. On the other, just 1,000 Swiss mountaineers. These were farmers, herdsmen, and hunters, armed only with their unwavering will and deadly halberds. Imagine this moment. You are part of this colossal army stretching for miles along the slippery road. Your armor is heavy, but you feel invincible. Ahead lies easy prey, a mountain rabble that dared to challenge an empire, but suddenly the silence is shattered by a deafening roar. The sky, it seems, is splitting open. From the steep forested slopes of Mount Morgarten, like a merciless avalanche, a hail of huge stones and logs crashes down. This is not just a battle. This is pure primal chaos. The sound of cracking wood, the clang of steel, the desperate screams of wounded men, and the dying neighs of horses merge into a nightmarish cacophony. Man-sized stones smash through the ranks, breaking bones and turning proud knights into helpless piles of metal and flesh. The column is caught in a deadly trap. To their left, impassable cliffs. To their right, the icy depths of the lake. Every step forward is a step into the abyss. Every step back means a crushing stampede, suffocating them within their own ranks. At this very moment, before the Austrians could even grasp the full scale of the disaster, the Swiss emerge from the trees like ghosts. Their dense, relentless formation, bristling with a forest of halberds, crashes into the confused mass of knights. This isn't a battle. This is a slaughter. This is an absolutely unprecedented event that will forever change the face of war. This is a story about how intelligence and adaptability triumphed over brute force and outdated doctrines of war. But to understand how these mountaineers, seemingly doomed to defeat, managed to turn the tide of history, we need to step back and explore the context of this unprecedented conflict. What happened at Morgarten was far more than just a local skirmish in remote mountains. It was a pivotal moment, a foundational event that changed not only the fate of a handful of freedom-loving peasants, but also forever reshaped the political and military map of Europe. This isn't just the chronicle of a single battle. It's a gripping saga about the birth of a nation, about how sheer audacity and an unyielding will for freedom posed a definitive challenge to the mighty Habsburg Empire. Until this day, knightly cavalry was considered an invincible force, the pinnacle of military art. Heavily armored riders whose charges swept everything before them were the absolute masters of medieval battlefields. But Morgarten shattered this dogma. It irrefutably demonstrated the complete ineffectiveness and catastrophic vulnerability of knightly cavalry in treacherous mountain terrain. In this bloody slaughter, where armored horses and their proud riders became nothing more than helpless targets, infantry, simple infantry made up of farmers and herdsmen, established itself as a dominant and deadly force. The Swiss mountaineers, armed with innovative halberds, deadly weapons that could pierce the strongest armor, showed that discipline, tactics, and a deep knowledge of the terrain could utterly destroy numerical superiority and outdated notions of warfare. Their victory was not merely a stroke of luck, it was a triumph of intellect and adaptability over brute force and arrogance. It was on that November day, in that bloody pass, that the unshakable foundation for the future Swiss Confederation was laid. The little-known cantons of Schwyz, Uri, and Unterwalden, who had formed their eternal alliance in 1291, asserted their right to exist with iron and blood. They not only defended their autonomy, but also inspired others, showing that independence could be seized through battle. This was the first, but far from the last, step on the path to creating a unique state whose military glory would echo across Europe for centuries to come. But to understand how these mountain people, seemingly doomed to defeat, managed to turn the tide of history, we need to step back and examine the context of this unprecedented conflict. To truly grasp the brutality and relentless significance of the Battle of Morgarten, we need to rewind the tape of history back to the turbulent early 14th century. Europe, torn by internal strife and ambition, viewed the Alps not as a barrier, but as a strategic prize. At the very heart of these majestic yet harsh mountains lay the Gotthard Pass, a critically important and the shortest trade route connecting the prosperous cities of northern Italy with the powerful German lands. Control over it meant immense wealth and influence. The powerful and expansionist House of Habsburg, whose domains were steadily expanding, had set their sights on this vital artery. They craved complete control to solidify their power over the region. However, standing in the way of their relentless advance were three small but stubborn Swiss cantons, Uri, Schweiz, and Unterwalden. These mountain dwellers, whose existence was inextricably linked to the harsh but free life in the Alps, were not defenseless. As early as 1291, they had formed an eternal alliance, a foundational agreement that became the cornerstone of the future Swiss Confederation. Moreover, they possessed invaluable imperial charters from previous Habsburg emperors, which guaranteed them local autonomy within the empire. These charters were their shield, their right to an independent existence. However, in 1313, Emperor Henry VII died. His death left the throne of the Holy Roman Empire vacant, with two immediate claimants, Louis IV of Bavaria and Frederick the Fair, a prince from the House of Habsburg. This became the spark in a powder keg. The cantons, with good reason, feared that a victory for Frederick would lead to the inevitable annexation of their lands. They therefore unequivocally supported Louis IV. The conflict, which had been smoldering for years, instantly escalated. But the immediate trigger for a full-scale invasion was an event that the Habsburgs perceived as a blatant insult. For decades, the Canton of Schwyz and the Benedictine monastery of Einsiedeln, which was under the direct patronage of the Habsburgs, had been embroiled in bitter land disputes. Settlers from Schwyz cleared forests and built farms on lands the monastery claimed as its own. In response to the abbot's complaints and a subsequent excommunication on the night of January 6, 1314, the people of Schwyz, led by the audacious landamann Werner Stauffacher, launched a brazen raid on the monastery. They didn't just plunder it, they also desecrated the church, took monks hostage, and even worse, burned the monastic documents, likely including records of land rights. This was a direct declaration of war, an unforgivable act that demanded immediate and brutal retribution. The stakes in this conflict were immense. For the mountain people, it was a matter of survival, of preserving their precious, hard-won independence and their unique way of life. They would either defend their freedom or be completely absorbed by the Habsburgs, their lands becoming part of a vast empire, and they themselves reduced to serfs. For the Habsburgs, it was not only revenge for the humiliation, but also an opportunity to finally eliminate the obstacle on the path to St. Gotthard, to brutally crush any resistance, and to assert their absolute dominance. Thus began preparations for a punitive expedition led by Frederick Habsburg's brother, Duke Leopold of Austria. He was an ambitious man, full of contempt for what he called the mountain rabble. But to understand why this seemingly inevitable Habsburg victory turned into an absolute disaster, we need to look under the hood of both sides' war machines. What we had were two armies, but their approach to warfare was fundamentally different, like two worlds on a collision course. On one side, Duke Leopold III led a brilliant yet archaic embodiment of feudal military doctrine. On the other, the Swiss, seemingly just a militia of farmers and herdsmen, but in reality a highly effective, deadly fighting machine forged in the mountains and in an unending struggle for freedom. Their strength wasn't solely rooted in the innate, adventurous and warlike spirit of these mountain herders and hunters, whose lives in the Alps demanded constant readiness for risk and survival. They were a people quick to draw a dagger at the slightest provocation, believing that to give an inch meant losing everything. This power also stemmed from a meticulously developed system built upon iron discipline, innovative tactics, and the ruthless exploitation of the terrain. Forget knightly arrogance and the pursuit of personal glory. The Swiss were united by kinship solidarity and their long fight for autonomy. Their cantonal militias, though made up of common people, underwent regular training. Every able-bodied man was trained, motivated, and equipped, ensuring the entire force maintained high combat effectiveness. They fought unconventionally by medieval standards. They took no prisoners, never retreated, preferring to die in battle rather than turn their backs on the enemy. This made them utterly formidable adversaries, whose mere presence on the battlefield could decide the outcome of a battle. Their tactics and weaponry were equally crucial. The key to their success was the innovative use of the halberd. Imagine this weapon, a massive axe head on a long pole, combining the piercing power of a pike with the brutal chopping force of an axe. Chronicler Conrad Justiner described them as terrifying instruments of murder, or helmbarten, capable of slicing through even the most heavily armored opponents like a razor and hacking them to pieces. At a time when knightly armor was becoming increasingly robust, the halberd proved to be a revolutionary answer, capable of piercing the steel walls of the heaviest plate armor. The Swiss didn't just carry this weapon, they wielded it with masterful skill, delivering devastating blows with both hands, increasing the reach and power of every movement. But the halberd was only one part of a deadly system. The Swiss fought in dense formations, often called battalions. These were impenetrable mobile squares, typically 30 to 50 warriors, wide and deep, designed to repel attacks from all directions. Imagine this. The first two ranks consisted of heavily armored pikemen, wielding pikes 3 to 3.5 meters long. Behind them were the halberdiers, ready to chop and thrust over the shoulders of the front lines. Further back, even longer pikes extended, reaching 5.5 to 6 meters. This formation was absolutely ideal for fighting in narrow passes and against heavy cavalry, transforming them into steel hedgehogs capable of delivering a devastating ramming blow without breaking their ranks. The Swiss lived and breathed the mountains, understanding their language like no one else. This mastery of their homeland also meant they were experts in logistics and adapting to any terrain. They transformed their homeland into an impregnable fortress, constructing Letzinen, massive defensive structures. These were earthen ramparts and walls, up to 4 meters high and stretching up to 8 kilometers, built from stone and wood and reinforced with towers. Both old and new, these fortifications blocked the main approaches to the cantons, particularly the Schwyz Valley. And even when they appeared to leave a hole in their defenses, as they did at Morgarten, it was never an oversight. Instead, it was part of a brilliant, deadly plan. Their intelligence network was brilliant, gathering crucial information from neighbors. This allowed them to decipher enemy tricks and prepare perfect ambushes. What about the Habsburgs? Duke Leopold III's army, however, was the complete opposite. Thousands of well-armed yet overconfident knights whose strength relied on brute force and individual valor. They were blinded by pride and immense disdain for what they called mountain rabble. For them, war was a matter of honor, not tactics. Their feudal army structure, where each knight sought personal glory and tried to outdo the others, led to chaos and disorganization in their marching columns. The complete lack of basic reconnaissance proved absolutely fatal. They could not or would not adapt to the treacherous conditions of mountain warfare, instead relying on their sheer numbers and outdated cavalry charge tactics. This made them incredibly vulnerable against the unified, disciplined, and deadly Swiss force. The stage was set. Two fundamentally different philosophies of war were about to collide in a brutal confrontation. But before the carnage erupted, let's delve into the atmosphere of that cold November day, when the fate of Europe hung in the balance. So, the picture is clear. The arrogant Habsburgs, convinced of their unchallenged might, against the Highlanders, whose will for freedom was as unyielding as the Alpine peaks. Now, step into the shoes of one of these warriors. Imagine this cold, damp November day of 1315. The air is thick with moisture, rising from the icy waters of Lake Ageri. The road, a narrow thread winding along its shores, is slick with black ice and morning frost. You are one of Duke Leopold's thousands of knights, part of an imposing, steel-gleaming column. Your heavy armor weighs on your shoulders, but inside you, righteous anger boils, along with the anticipation of an easy victory. After all, you are marching to punish the mountain rabble, these insolent peasants who dared to encroach upon the Empire's lands. Even if the sun breaks through the clouds, it only glints coldly off your helmets, shields, and spear tips. You hear the monotonous thud of hooves on the frozen ground, the creak of leather saddles, and the muffled voices of your comrades, full of overconfident bravado. Your banners snap in the biting wind, promising swift and merciless retribution. Scouts? What for? A vanguard? against these peasants. Your pride and contempt have utterly blinded you. But up ahead, around every treacherous turn in the road, behind every silent-looking stone, something else entirely is waiting. The slopes of Morgarten Mountain, thick with dark forest, seem empty. But they hide a deadly, perfectly planned trap. Every bush, every tree hides the tense, waiting figures of the Highlanders. Their hearts beat in unison, their eyes scanning every inch of the road. They feel your approach, your armor, your arrogance, and they know that soon you will pay dearly for it. The column pushes steadily forward, drawing deeper into the narrow defile. This is the tight space between the steep, impassable slope of Mount Morgarten and the marshy, treacherous shores of Lake Egeri. The road narrows further, and horses begin to stumble on deceptive patches of ice. The ranks close in, transforming the once proud army into an unwieldy, cumbersome mass. And then it happens. Suddenly, deafeningly, absolute chaos. A hail of massive rocks and logs, cascading down from the steep forested slopes, crashes onto the column of knights, trapped in the narrow pass. You hear the horrifying crunch of snapping trees, the metallic shriek of steel buckling under relentless weight, the screams of terrified men, and the dying neighs of horses. The air immediately fills with the smell of fear, dust, and blood. Horses rear back, kick wildly, throwing their riders. The formation, which had seemed unbreakable, instantly shatters, turning into a helpless, crushed mass. All the world's sounds merge into this nightmarish crescendo, and you realize this is not just a battle. This is a slaughter from which there may be no escape. Your armor, which a minute ago was a symbol of strength, has now become a deadly trap, restricting your movement. You feel a suffocating, crushing pressure from all sides. Where can you run? Where can you hide? The mountain is collapsing on you, and the lake waits below. The stage is set, the curtain is up, prepared to witness as the deadly trap snaps shut. The silence that briefly settled after the primeval roar of rocks was deceptive. It only foreshadowed the hell that was about to unfold. The vanguard of Austrian knights, led by Montfort von Tettnang, was completely unsuspecting. Their pride and overconfidence had blinded them to the need for reconnaissance, and so, when the head of their column, stretching 2 kilometers along the narrow pass, finally reached the village of Schafstetten, the way forward was utterly impassable. A massive barricade of felled trees and boulders lay directly across the road. A moment of stunned confusion fell over them. These knights, used to crushing any obstacle in their path, now found themselves forced to dismount and clear the way by hand. The moment the armored knights began to clear the blockade, a deadly barrage rained down from the steep forested slopes. 50 Swiss crossbowmen hidden in ambush unleashed a sudden, devastating volley. Bolts fired at close range pierced armor, sending horses and men tumbling into a tangled heap. Simultaneously, new avalanches of rocks and logs tumbled down, sweeping them away, crushing and obliterating. The main Habsburg column, advancing from behind, was unable to halt. It crashed into the trapped vanguard, turning the narrow pass into an unwieldy, self-strangling bottleneck. Horses, agitated and confined by the narrow space, disobeyed their riders, their panic spreading to the men. The air filled with desperate screams, the clang of steel, and the dying neighs of horses. It was at this critical moment, with the Austrians completely disoriented, squeezed together, and gripped by panic, that the battle horn of Uri, the Harthorn, sounded. From ambush, down the wooded mountain slopes, the main Swiss battle formation descended swiftly and relentlessly. A dense formation, bristling with halberds, like a living battering ram, unleashed new, destructive avalanches of stones and logs upon the enemy. Then, with a furious cry, it crashed directly into the rear of the column. Picture this utterly crushing impact. The mountaineers, many of them in simple leather jackets with spikes on their boot soles, moved easily across the slippery slope, while the heavily armored knights and their horses struggled for every foot. The Swiss halberdiers, using their advantage in maneuverability and weaponry, unleashed a storm of hacking and thrusting blows upon the enemy. An uncontrollable, widespread panic erupted among the Austrian ranks. The knights, unable to maneuver in the cramped conditions, couldn't use their long lances. Their individual valor proved useless against the unified, disciplined onslaught. Halberds, described as terrible instruments of slaughter, cut and thrust through them like a razor. This was no battle, wrote chronicler Johannes von Winterthur. Duke Leopold's men were simply slaughtered like cattle. Dozens of Austrian foot soldiers, witnessing the bravest knights falling helplessly, plunged into the lake in a panic, preferring to drown in its depths rather than fall victim to the ruthless fury of the Swiss. The chaos intensified as retreating knights on their 600-kilogram horses trampled their own infantry, further exacerbating the crush and panic. The Swiss showed no mercy. They relentlessly pursued and cut down the fleeing, giving them no chance. Around 1,500 to 2,000 men, by some estimates, were killed, with many more drowning in the lake. Virtually the entire flower of Habsburg knighthood was annihilated. The vanguard commander, Montfort von Tettnang, was killed. Duke Leopold himself, with the remnants of the rearguard, shamefully fled. He was half dead from extreme grief, as recalled by a chronicler whose father witnessed the events. The Swiss suffered minimal losses. This was an absolute crushing victory. The Battle of Morgarten was over, but its political, military, and cultural consequences were only just beginning to unfold, forever changing the map of Europe. Even before the blood had soaked into the frozen ground at Morgarten, the echo of the crushing Swiss victory had already spread across Europe, marking an undeniable turning point and a foundational event that forever changed the political and military landscape. It was not simply a victory, it was a manifesto, a declaration of the birth of a new power and the decline of the old. The political consequences were profound, marking the birth of a nation. Within a month of the battle, on December 9th, 1315, in the village of Brunnen, the cantons of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden renewed their alliance treaty originally established in 1291. This agreement, known as the Letter of Morgarten, used a new word to describe this unique political entity, Eidgenosse, meaning confederation. Morgarten solidified their position and gave an enormous boost to the national movement. They didn't just defend their autonomy. They effectively gained sovereignty, laying an unshakable foundation for the future Swiss state. The Habsburgs were utterly defeated. The loss of several hundred members of the high nobility was catastrophic. Austria was forced to sign a 10-month truce, which was extended multiple times. This created an unprecedented window of opportunity for neighboring lands and cities. New, still invisible, but already tangible borders began to emerge on the map of Europe. Within 40 years, key cities like Lucerne in 1322, Zug, and Zurich joined the Confederation. The alliance, born in the mountains, steadily expanded, providing its members vital protection from the Habsburgs and other aggressors. Until the Battle of Sempach in 1386, a period of relative peace reigned, but it was a peace in which the Swiss were absolutely independent. The Battle of Morgarten represented an absolute infantry revolution. It unequivocally proved that disciplined infantry, armed with halberds and skillfully using the terrain, could crush even vastly superior knightly cavalry. The halberd, a terrifying instrument of death, demonstrated its ruthless effectiveness against the heaviest armor. Swiss formations, dense and organized blocks of men, became a deadly model for future armies. This battle heralded the decline of knighthood as the dominant force on the battlefield and ushered in an era of professional, disciplined infantry armies. Soon, Swiss infantrymen would become the most sought-after and highly paid mercenaries in Europe, and their tactics would be actively studied and copied across the continent. Morgarten showed that true strength lay not in the gleam of armor, but in tactical intelligence, discipline, and the will to win. This was the first, but not the last, chapter in the history of their military glory. For the Swiss themselves, Morgarten quickly became something more than just a battle. It became a cornerstone of their patriotism, a symbol of freedom, defiance, and unity. As early as the 14th century, the canton of Schwyz decided to annually commemorate the battle's anniversary. Legends began to form around it, for instance, that William Tell himself participated in the battle, even though this doesn't align with historical facts. Chapels and monuments erected at the battle site became pilgrimage sites. The Battle of Morgarten became etched in the collective memory as the moment a handful of brave individuals defended their land against tyranny. Annual shooting competitions held since 1912, along with large-scale anniversary celebrations, all powerfully demonstrate the deep and lasting impact of this battle on Swiss identity. The Battle of Morgarten became a turning point, laying the foundation for the Swiss Confederacy and changing Europe's military doctrine. It proved that disciplined infantry, armed with halberds and utilizing the terrain, could crush knightly cavalry that was superior in numbers and armament, thus foreshadowing the end of the era of feudal levies and the birth of professional armies. But what profound lesson lies behind this brutal victory? What can Morgarten tell us about leadership, systems, and the fragility of empires today? The Battle of Morgarten is more than just a page in history, more than a mere triumph of Highlanders over knights. It is a resounding manifesto, a timeless lesson that true strength lies not in the sheer number of shining armors or in blind brute force, but in intellect, adaptability, iron discipline, and, most importantly, in an unwavering will to freedom. Morgarten made it abundantly clear that even the most powerful, absolutely dominant empires are fragile and vulnerable in the face of the organized will of a people. The Habsburgs, the embodiment of feudal dogma and old orders, faced a system that was head and shoulders above their archaic notions of warfare. The leadership lesson of Werner Stauffacher and his comrades remains relevant to this day. He utilized every feature of the terrain, transforming it from an obstacle into a deadly weapon, and he turned every weakness of the enemy, their pride, their disorganization, their inability to adapt, into a fatal trap. This was a victory of tactical genius over strategic short-sightedness. This daring victory triggered an unstoppable avalanche of change that fundamentally altered not only the art of war, but also the entire social landscape of Europe. It heralded the decline of chivalry, demonstrating that disciplined, motivated infantry could crush heavy cavalry. It was here, in this narrow alpine defile, that the idea of professional armies was born, where efficiency and tactics were valued above titles and individual valor. A new type of warrior emerged, whose discipline, training, and loyalty were unbreakable. Ultimately, Morgarten laid the unshakable foundations of modern Switzerland, a nation that seemed destined for absorption, but instead became a symbol of independence and military effectiveness. Its famous neutrality and unprecedented prosperity are today a direct echo of that audacious, bloody victory in the mountains. The Battle of Morgarten is an enduring reminder. True power lies not in the gleam of gold or steel, but in clarity of thought, unity of spirit, and an unwavering readiness to defend what you believe in. It's a lesson the world continues to learn even today, as it looks upon a humble yet indomitable nation, forged from blood and the will for freedom in the snowy Alps.